We will talk today about the Portuguese occupation of Brazil. In the early 16th century, the Portuguese arrived on the shores of a vast uncharted land, green, humid, and filled with people whose world was older than Europe's written memory. They would call it Brazil. But this was not a discovery. It was occupation, a centuries-long transformation that would reshape an entire continent, creating one of the most complex societies in the history of the Atlantic world. This is the story of how Portugal claimed, exploited, and built Brazil through conquest, commerce, faith, and survival. On April 22, 1500, a Portuguese fleet led by Pedro Álvares Cabral reached the coast of what is now Bahia. Cabral had set sail for India, following the route opened by Vasco da Gama, but strong winds pushed him west. To Portugal, this was divine providence. To the indigenous peoples who lived there, it was the beginning of an irreversible encounter. Cabral claimed the land for King Manuel I, naming it Terra de Vera Cruz, the land of the true cross. But what attracted Portugal was not salvation, but resources. They soon discovered a red wood, pau-brasil, that produced a valuable dye. From that tree, the colony would take its name, Brazil. By the 1530s, Portugal established permanent settlements, dividing the coastline into hereditary captaincies, and vast strips of land were granted to nobles who were to govern and profit from them. Most of these captaincies failed. Disease, conflict, and isolation took their toll. But one would endure: Pernambuco, where sugarcane thrived. By the mid-1500s, Brazil had become the largest sugar-producing colony in the world. Portugal's empire depended on this new wealth. Sugar was called white gold, and it came at a terrible price. To cultivate and process it, the Portuguese imported enslaved Africans, beginning one of the darkest chapters in world history. Over the next 3 centuries, about 5 million Africans would be transported to Brazil, more than to any other region in the Americas. Plantations stretched across Bahia and Pernambuco. The Jesuits built missions to convert indigenous peoples. But resistance burned quietly in escaped slave communities known as quilombos, and in indigenous groups who fought to reclaim their land. The Portuguese crown soon faced rivals. From 1630 onward, the Dutch Republic conquered nearly half of Brazil's settled European area, seizing Recife and Olinda. Thus, for 24 years, the Dutch sought to control Brazil's sugar trade. Under Count Johan Maurits of Nassau, the Dutch brought artists, scientists, and engineers, briefly turning Recife into a cosmopolitan outpost. But in 1654, Portuguese and local forces expelled them, reasserting Lisbon's control. The struggle for Brazil was not only military, but it was also economic. As gold was discovered in Minas Gerais in the late 1600s, Brazil became the glittering heart of the Portuguese Empire. Tens of thousands of settlers and enslaved miners rushed inland. Entire cities like Ouro Preto and Mariana rose from the mountains. By the 18th century, Brazil was the jewel of Portugal's overseas dominion, richer, larger, and more vital than the mother country itself. The colonial system was a hierarchy built on race, class, and loyalty. At the top, Portuguese-born elites, the Reinois. Below them, locally born whites, the Brasileiros, and mixed-race populations navigating a rigid order. At the bottom, enslaved Africans and indigenous peoples, whose labor sustained the entire economy. Portugal ruled through strict control. Trade with other nations was forbidden. Printing presses were banned until the 19th century. The colony's wealth flowed to Lisbon, while its people lived under the shadow of royal decrees and the church's authority. Yet, beneath this structure, a new identity was forming. Brazilian rather than Portuguese. Through language, music, and faith, cultures blended: African rhythms with Catholic prayers, European architecture with indigenous art. A new civilization was being born, even as oppression deepened. In the late 18th century, the winds of revolution reached Brazil. The American Revolution, the Enlightenment, and the independence of Spanish America inspired local movements. In 1789, in Minas Gerais, a group of intellectuals and officers launched the Inconfidencia Mineira, an uprising against Portuguese rule. Its leader, Tiradentes, became a national martyr after his execution on April 21, 1792. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars changed everything. In 1807, Napoleon invaded Portugal, and the Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil, escorted by the British Navy. For the first time, a European monarch ruled from the Americas. Rio de Janeiro became the capital of the Portuguese Empire, transforming Brazil from a colony to an imperial center. When King João VI returned to Portugal in 1821, his son Dom Pedro remained in Brazil, but the colony had changed forever. It had cities, trade, and a sense of nationhood that could not be undone. When Lisbon demanded submission, Dom Pedro refused. On September 7, 1822, he declared Brazil's independence, shouting, "Independencia ou morte," independence or death. Thus, ended over 3 centuries of Portuguese occupation. Yet, the legacy of that occupation remains. A nation built on contradiction, beauty and brutality, unity and inequality, faith and resistance. From the beaches of Bahia to the gold mines of Minas, the Portuguese reshaped the continent. But Brazil, in turn, transformed Portugal and, in time, transformed the world. The history of Brazil is the story of survival and the power of a people to create an identity from an empire. Tell us what you think. Thank you.